Welcome to episode 28 of Forest Focus. I'm your host, Paul Wade, with the Regional Public Affairs and Communications Office. In this episode, we focus on how reforestation and restoration projects begin. It all starts with a seed. What happens when the 18 National Forest in California's Pacific Southwest region of the USDA Forest Service needs to replant trees after the damage of a wildfire, insects, or other harmful activity that has scarred the landscape? What they need are seedlings adapted to grow in specific elevations and climates. What they need to do is call the seed specialists at the Placerville Nursery, located in Camino on the Eldorado National Forest. And joining us on the phone is the nursery manager, Gary Klein, to help educate us on this 65-year-old resource the Forest Service has to help bring a forest back to life. Gary, tell us about yourself.
Let's see, I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. Came out to Nevada to go to college and kind of fell in love with Sierra Nevada and never left. I've worked as a silviculturist and a culturist before, so basically a forester for about, 20-something years, 25 years, I guess, about before I came to this job. I've been in this job for about 7 years. And I've also worked in fire and fuels and recreation prior to my work in forestry.
And how did you end up in the realm of being able to be a nursery manager?
Well, I majored in environmental science, and then partway through schooling, I just took a greater number of forestry classes because of my interest in it. Environmental science is kind of a general field dealing with, all the different elements of environmental science, from all the way from geology up through, hydrology, meteorology, even for that matter. I just developed an interest in forests in general.
Now, what I've read is that the Placerville Nursery, which was established in 1957, 1958, was one of 13 in the country at the height of the nursery system. Now it appears to be the only federal nursery in operation in California. What's the footprint look like in August of 2022?
And then there are 5 other federal nurseries, one in Oregon, 2 in Idaho, 1 in Nebraska, and 1 in Michigan.
And from our previous talks, it sounds like you network with those other nursery managers at least monthly, and you're hoping to return to a yearly conference to share best practices and lessons learned. Gary, is it safe to say that you have to have a green thumb to work at the nursery?
As one of my bosses said years ago, you kind of have to have kind of a gardener mentality to do a lot of this kind of work. It's not the same, obviously, as your garden at home, but there are similarities, of course, in liking to grow things and see how they transform over time. I even like to, when I can, go out and take a look at projects I did before I came here, in particular back when I worked on a different national forest, just to see how things are coming along.
So let's talk about the nursery. I know you used to give tours to the public, so give the listeners a version of that in regards to the nursery's history, size, what's its purpose, and who is keeping it a well-oiled, or I should say, watered machine.
So the Placerville Nursery was started in 1958. It was a very small operation back then. I think from what I've read, it started out as like a little patch of about 10 acres, and over time there were purchases made from local land purchases from local ranchers that eventually resulted in the the current nursery, which covers 157 acres. And the nursery used to only grow bare root seedlings, so that required a lot of acreage, a lot of field space. At one time in the 1980s, late 80s, it produced as many as 16 million seedlings per year. Since then, the production has gone down over the years, and then with the current direction from Congress, we are in the process of ramping back up again. About 15 years ago or so, the nursery expanded in that we do both bare root and container grown seedlings now. The main reason for that is there are some of the native species that really ideally should be grown by container rather than bare root. You just get better results with them, especially when they're outplanted after they leave the nursery. The nursery, when all positions are filled, including my job, there's a total of 16 people that work here. Currently, we are very short-handed. We only have, I believe it's 9 of the 16 positions are filled right now. So we are in the rebuilding mode, I guess you could say, hiring for additional positions. We currently are producing about 4 to 5 million seedlings per year, and we're expected to more than double that production over the next few years. So the nursery is going through some expansion. We have expansion plans that are in the works. The actual on-the-ground work for that will start next year in 2023.
Expanding? Well, I'll have to ask you about that later. Sounds like there will be a greater emphasis to fill these vacancies. Are all those that work there at the nursery Forest Service employees, or are some of them contracted?
Of the ones that I mentioned, those are all Forest Service employees, but we do a very large amount of our work through contracts. There's certain times of the year that we have a much bigger personnel need to get the work done. That's in particular during the winter and springtime, and to a lesser extent in the summer. And it just makes more sense to contract that work out during those periods of higher need. We also hire some temporary employees under temporary hiring appointments. Currently, we only have 2 temporary employees, but ideally we'd have probably 4 to 6. It just, I think, like any other entity, business, government agency, whatever out there, it's difficult right now when it comes to hiring, and it's no different with us in that respect.
Well, let's become a hiring podcast for a minute. In case someone is listening and working at a nursery, sounds like an interesting job. Gary, can you share what positions and a bit of a job description you have there?
We have a person who's the seed bank manager, and their job is to basically oversee all of the processing of cones when we get cones in to extract seed, and do cleaning, moisture testing, x-raying, and germination testing of seed. And then there's a lot of inventory work that goes into putting that into our seed freezers, and then making sure that's an accurate database, so we know at all times what we have in the way of seed and how much for each seed lot we have, and all the pertinent data that we need along with that. We have 1 equipment operator right now. We have 2 horticulturists. One of them handles or oversees the container operation, and one of them does bare root, as the bare root horticulturist. And that person also runs our native grass seed program, because we We also have a small operation where we do bulking of native grass seeds, and that's used for various different things, in particular things like erosion control. Grass seed doesn't store as well as tree seeds do, so that's kind of a constant thing where we have about 2.5 acres that we've been harvesting seed from I believe 5 different native species. So that person oversees that. We have an office manager, and then we also have a person that runs our white pine blister rust program, which is it's part of the nursery, but it's a program where we look for and test for natural genetic resistance to white pine blister rust, which is an introduced disease that has affected in particular 2 white pine species, sugar pine and western white pine. But there are other white pine species that we're doing research on. That includes some that are more rare species like whitebark pine, foxtail pine, limber pine, and bristlecone pine, the oldest living of the tree species. In addition to those positions I just mentioned, we also have a person that works with the seed bank manager that I mentioned. It's called a seed lab technician, and they are actually the ones doing a lot of the testing. And then there are a total of 7 other people that are kind of a roving crew that work in all the different departments at the nursery as needed. And then there's another position also that works with the white pine blister rust program, but they also, as kind of like as everybody else here does, you kind of go where you're needed at the time. It varies over the course of the year where we have the biggest need.
And those vacancies are announced on USA Jobs. Oh, and real quick for the listeners, we will be joined by the seed bank manager later in the show. But in regards to the jobs in general, I'm sure it appeals to those who have worked in private nurseries or have an educated background in a field that relates.
Well, the ones here we have at the nursery, they will be advertised on USA Jobs.
Okay, good. You mentioned a seed bank. What other facilities are part of the production at the nursery?
Let's see, about 10 different buildings on the site. We do have a small office building, but most of the people working here are working out in the fields and other buildings here most of the time. We have one building that is devoted pretty much entirely to the seed end of things, and we call that our seed extractory. We have a bunch of specialized equipment in there that we use for removing seed from cones and then cleaning the seed, because the seeds have seed wings on them that we want taken off. We want to get the seed to as clean as pure seed as possible. And that equipment in that building is very specialized for doing that work. And we have a lab in there which is used for all the testing we do. In addition, next to that building, we have a couple of very large freezers. The one of them is probably is almost the equivalent of a 2-story tall building that we have just racks and racks of seed in there, and it's all mapped out so we know where to look when we have to go pull a certain seed lot from it. And those are kept well below freezing to maintain the seed for as long as possible. We have another building that we use for our equipment operator uses. That's where they do repairs and so forth on the equipment. Because we not only have tractors and forklifts, things like that, but along with those tractors, we have various different farm implements that are used on the tractor, and those have to be calibrated and so forth, and that's what that building is used for. and we've got some greenhouses, although most of the growing that we do with the container crops are actually done under these shade structures. So they're not really a building. They're kind of these suspend netting over that provides a certain amount of shade so that we can grow seedlings under that shade. So they get enough sun to grow, but they don't get so much that they are sun scalded or that we have overly large amounts of evaporation, transpiration of moisture, so that it keeps us from having to use excessive amounts of water, I guess is what I'm getting at. And then we have another building that is for our packing operation when we grade and pack trees that's done during the winter time. And then there's 3 very large coolers that are behind that building, which is where we store the seedlings in after they've been graded and packed. And they are stored in there until we ship them out to the individual forests or other agencies that we work with.
You mentioned something interesting in how you try to extract and store the purest seed as possible. Is there handling requirements? For some reason, visions of white gloves come to mind.
It's not really that necessary. They're pretty resilient. When we do take seed out of those freezers, we have to thaw it out before we weigh the seed because we determine how much seed we're going to need for a given order based upon that data that we collected when we process the seed. So we know the approximate seed per pound, we know the purity, we know the germination rate, and we retest those germination rates every 4 or 5 years because they do decline a little bit over time.
At the beginning of the show, my introduction stated how the nursery has seedlings adapted for certain elevations and climates. So how does the Camino-based facility, which is at 3,000 feet with temperatures ranging from the low 90s in July, August to upper 30s in December, January, mimic the various regions within the state?
Yeah, well, the importance in when we're growing seedlings is not as much where we grow them at as it is where the seed was collected. When we use seed, for instance, from a forest in Southern California, the seed that we're collecting from those trees has developed in a forest where it's been there for many years, and over time those trees have become adapted, have been adapted to those sites, to those site conditions or range of conditions. And so we can grow here at Placerville seedlings that would end up being planted in virtually any part of the state. But the important part is to make sure that the genetic integrity is there with the seed. And that's why we are able to grow for all of the 18 national forests in the state. We also do some growing for the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest in Nevada. And we also have been growing seedlings for other agencies, including the National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation. And I think it's important to point out, too, that we not only grow conifers, that's our primary group of trees that we grow, but we also grow hardwoods and shrubs and other native plants. Like, for instance, with Bureau of Reclamation, we've done some projects for them over the years where we've grown native shrub species that have been used on vegetating dam sites, because there's been a number of projects. I'm surprised I haven't seen more of this in the news, but rather than just building more reservoirs, for instance, for water storage in California. One of the things that's been done is to actually raise the dam height on some of the reservoirs in California, which of course has meant a lot of work being done to the dam. And on a lot of these lakes, these reservoirs, those dams are primarily earthen dams. And so when that work is done, they need to revegetate the site. And we've been involved, not that much this year, but in the past on growing shrub species for those agencies. We also grow for the county resource conservation districts. They are able to work with private landowners. As in the federal nursery system, we are not allowed to actually sell directly to private landowners by statute under the act that created the federal nursery system. It prohibits us from doing that because of competition purposes. But the RCDs do work with small, non-industrial private landowners.
Well, that actually covered my next question, which is, who does the nursery serve? So, Gary, how does all this come together? How does it work when a national forest has a wildfire, like the Caldor fire, for example, which looks like a Mars landscape and can be seen within a half hour from your office? So explain the notification and action steps you go through to start a reforestation project.
Yeah, the way things work is that when there is a fire on any given national forest, the forest gets together, looks at the severity of the fire, what areas need to be reforested following those fires, and prioritizes what work needs to be done, not just in the way of planting, but oftentimes, most of the time, there's some type of site preparation that needs to be done. And the forest, after determining their purpose and need for that fire, goes forth to the public and proposes a project and goes through the environmental analysis that is required under the National Environmental Policy Act, and determines alternatives that could be considered to achieve the necessary restoration work. And then when they've determined that, and they've determined a time frame of when they can get this work done, they put in their tree orders based upon when they expect to have land, any given piece of land that's going to be reforested, ready for the work to be done. So, for instance, if there's an area that's forested, has large trees that on the site, fire goes through, before we can do anything in there, we really need to reduce the amount of biomass that's on that site, whether it be ideally through salvage logging so that the trees can be utilized for dimensional lumber. But then there's all this other material that's there, maybe trees that are smaller, too small to be utilized for dimensional lumber, that type of thing. So there might be, say, a salvage logging operation. There might be a need after that to do some other additional cleanup of fuels on the site. And then the forest, plans out this chronologically and orders trees to be grown here at the nursery to plant on those sites. So they actually put in the orders roughly a year and a half ahead of time. So for instance, the whatever orders that they will put in this fall when what we call our sowing orders come in, those will be to grow. We will be growing those trees in 2023, sowing them in the springtime of 23, growing them during that year, and then in the spring of 24 or early winter in some cases of 23. Most of the time it's done in the springtime though. those seedlings will actually be delivered to that national forest, and they will go about planting them in that springtime window of opportunity when the ground is open, enough of the snow is melted and so forth that we can get in there and get trees in the ground, and they have a long enough period with elevated soil moisture that they can establish themselves. So it's kind of a tricky thing, and that there's all these steps to it that require different things to be done, and within certain time frames.
Great stuff, Gary. How does these initiatives, namely the Replant Act of 2021, which, by the way, replant actually stands for repairing existing public land by adding necessary trees. So planting 1.2 billion trees, to be exact, over 10 years.
In the case of the Replant Act and how that comes into this is, in the past, for many, many years, the Forest Service has had a pretty limited amount of funding that has come from what's called the RT Trust Fund, which is monies that come in from tariffs on Canadian timber. And that money, the limitations on the amount of money available, therefore limited the amount of work that we could do to reforest these fires. And in a lot of cases, we had large amounts of acreage that we weren't able to reforest. We just simply didn't have the money, because not only is there the cost of growing the trees, planting the trees, and dealing with the competing vegetation after they're planted, but like I had just said here, there's all these other steps that go up to that. And if those areas have sat for years, of course, they've had other shrub species come in, and we've got to prepare those sites to be planted. The Replant Act provides that additional funding so that we can ramp up not only the reforestation of the fires that we unfortunately continue to have, these very large fires, but also to go back and catch up on the acres that we weren't able to cover in fires over, say, the last couple of decades, and basically get at that backlog of acres of reforestation that needs done.
Gary, is there a successful planting model? Meaning a client asks for 100,000 seeds and the planting team does their thing, but in the end, is there an expected failure rate? I have a term in front of me called target plant concept. Maybe this refers back to growing that perfect seed.
I've always heard this referred to as the target seedling concept.
Okay.
But they refer to it here as the target plant concept. So yeah, what it is it's an idea that there are certain characteristics of nursery-grown seedlings that we want to try to achieve. And those are things like a certain minimum and maximum shoot height, minimum stem diameter, root mass, good root development, lateral root development in particular. And we set those as standards that we use when we're doing our grading and packing. But we also our cultural standards or practices at the nursery are geared to get us to the place we want to be with things like shoot height, stem diameter, and root mass. And those are just a couple of the things that we use as grading standards. And the reason for the importance for those morphological grading standards is that when these seedlings are outplanted on a site, it's not like where you're planting them in your yard or something like that, where you can tend to them easily and you can give them extra water when you need to, extra fertilization, that type of thing. They're basically on their own when we put them in the ground. And so we need to have these characteristics that give them the greatest chance for survival when they're out on a site. And without meeting those, those standards that we're trying to shoot for in particular, those three categories, root mass, shoot height, and stem diameter, that if we don't have those dialed in to the best that we can for each species, then our chances of survival of those seedlings are diminished. And there are a little bit different standards for different species, but like for instance, some species are faster growers out of the shoot when the seed germinates than others. So you can expect to, maybe have higher minimums for some of those species than others, I guess would be a good way to describe it. It's basically trying to create standards that allow us to produce seedlings that have the greatest chance for survival in a harsh environment, which is what they're, when they're outplanted, they're not, the only extra water they're going to get is whatever Mother Nature gives them. We do vegetative control around the trees to reduce vegetative competition, but beyond that, they're kind of on their own when they're put in the ground.
You've mentioned some big numbers to plant trees in these burn scars and insect-infested areas. These are mostly remote, rugged terrain and very hard to access. Hopefully it's widely understood, but when someone does a reforestation project, it isn't using a plow or mechanical planting contraption, right?
Yeah, and because of the workforce size, we do most of our planting by contract. And it is very, very hard work, very labor intensive. We do what we can, what we call force account with our regular workforce, but we could not possibly get everything done without the help of contractors. We do the follow-up work, the vegetative control, what is referred to as release for survival, release from vegetative competition. We do the vast majority of that with contract work also. And for that matter, the site prep work, most of that is done by contract.
Well, since we have been mentioning the seed bank and seedlings for the past 30 minutes, what better time to introduce Maya Partain, a biological science technician who is working as the Placerville Nursery seed bank manager. So during a visit, we talked with Maya while she worked in the seedling germination room. That's probably about as best as I can put it. Maya, how long have you worked for the Forest Service, and how did your career journey lead you to the nursery?
So I've worked here for about 6 years. I actually started working here through the Forest Service Pathways program, which is a program for college students to basically work while they're in school, and then kind of you would have a nice transition when you're graduated to just kind of get a permanent position right away. So that's basically what happened. I started working here 6 years ago, and then I was in college for 2 years getting my bachelor's degree, and then about 2 years ago I finally got hired on permanently here as a biological science technician, and then I kind of wanted to focus working in the seed lab. It was kind of where my interests lie. I'm a botany person at heart, so being able to work more directly with the science aspect of plants was something I was more interested in. So I kind of shuffled my way to work more focused in the seed lab, and work directly with our previous seed bank manager. And then when she left about a year ago, I just kind of decided, okay, well, I'll step in and kind of just take on those duties and try to learn as much as I can.
What have been some of the more interesting things that you've done as a seed bank manager, and then describe this room that you're in and what's its purpose for the listeners.
This is one of my favorite aspects of my job. We're in the germination room, and this is where I basically test for seed germination. So as you can see, there's a lot of seedlings growing in here. That's great. I have to test every seed lot that we receive here. Every cone collection that we receive is tested for germination, and it basically involves putting seeds in these plates, putting moisture in there, and stratifying them in our cold freezer for a certain period of time depending on the species. And stratification is basically mimicking winter conditions. So it's cold temperatures, it's dark, it's moist, it's basically like as if the seed was either underneath snow or just in winter climate. And like I said, that depends on the species for how long we would put them in that cold climate temperature. Because as you know, some species really need that overwintering kind of period. And then after that stratification period is up, I move them into this germination room, and the seeds are in here for 4 weeks, and every week I come in, I look at what has germinated, I count everything that's germinated, and I basically just calculate what the percentage is that's germinated after 4 weeks have been up. So it's basically a very important number to see, you know, how strong the seed is, how well it will do when we want to sow the seed. It's really important for us to have that percentage because we use it when we calculate how much seed we need to use when we fill a sowing order from a forest.
I went into the seed bank, which was a chilly -4 degrees. Is storing seeds in that facility part of the stratification process?
So that's actually not part of the stratification. The stratification that we do is usually around 32 or 31 degrees Fahrenheit. So out there it's colder. And that is to prevent any possibility of germination. It's to keep the seed as dormant as possible. It's basically just to keep it in conditions where the seed will last as long as possible, because we've had seed that has been in there since the 60s. So we really want to make sure that it's in the right conditions where it won't germinate or it won't grow any mold or it won't, have any issues.
How many seeds are in the seed bank?
I don't know off the top of my head, but millions and millions of seeds are in there. Yeah, and we have various different species. We generally always have about 10 species that is like the majority of the seeds in there, but then we also have some special collections of native seeds. We have some grasses in there. We have quite a variety.
Much like Gary and many of you here at the nursery, you are a shop or office of one. Who are you able to network with, brainstorm on those deeper dive topics that revolve in the same like-minded hemisphere?
I am almost always in random communication with various different organizations, whether they're Forest Service or CAL FIRE or private nurseries a lot of the time. I actually was reaching out recently to the California Botanical Garden, trying to get some information from them about a certain species, because I know that they do seed testing as well. So I'm always in communication with a lot of different organizations and some private nurseries as well that we have sent seed to for them to try to sow. Actually, just this past year, we were working for Sequoia Kings Canyon and the Johnstein Company, which is up in Arcata, McKinleyville area up north. They were also working on sowing the same seed. So I was communicating with them about the germination rates or how they were doing their sowing process. So it's kind of a wide array of different people that I'm in contact with, yeah.
Do you get involved with the planting process?
I just do the growing, germination, the seed aspect of it. I did have the opportunity to go planting when they were doing the Kingfire planting, but it just was very long hours and intense work, so I was like, oh, I don't think I'll do that. But that is a cross-training opportunity, definitely. We do have people here that have done a lot of cross-training with botany and going out and doing plant surveys and kind of really getting to see the forest when they're in that restoration phase.
What are some of the equipment that you use on a daily basis to do your job?
I mean, having a micro pipette is like an amazing development. That's just a random great thing that I use constantly. It helps me keep any amount of measuring of water that I need to put in germination plates, keeps that consistent. It really kind of just keeps that in control. I mean, I can't believe how much paperwork I have to do all the time to keep records of everything. It's a lot of paperwork. The X-ray machine is really cool. I really enjoy that. It's really interesting to just see the internal anatomy of the seed. And it's very helpful for me to also determine, before I do germination tests, it's helpful for me to determine the overall health of the seed.
In regards to survivability rates, Gary has helped us understand some background on that topic, but there has to be some connection that you have, having spent days, weeks, months with these seeds, knowing that the next generation will see these reforestation and restoration efforts.
From what I have heard as far as feedback from other forests about how the trees have done once they're planted, they do really well. They're pretty resilient, especially the pines. I mean, if they're in the right seed zone, in the right elevation, they're gonna grow, unless there's a lot of predation, which is always a possibility. But usually they do really well. And the most rewarding part of my job is to be able to go out into the forest that has been regenerated by the seed that we have here. Yeah, it's amazing. I think that's probably the most exciting part of the job, is to think about those really long-term effects. Like, you know, I get to see the seeds and the seedlings for only about a year, but I know that once they're growing and planted in the forest, it's going to be decades that they're going to grow into this big, beautiful tree, and then other people can enjoy the forest, and I can go enjoy the forest, and it's very rewarding in that way.
Well, thank you to Maya Partain for speaking to us about her job as the seed bank manager. And as a seed specialist, turns out her favorite tree is the giant sequoia, followed by the sugar pine. Speaking of the cones regarding sugar pine, let's go back to Gary here, because he mentioned something. When you say collecting seeds, to collect seeds, is that process primarily someone climbing a tree and selecting the best cones at the right time of the year?
That's how we collect the cones that we process for seed removal. We can't when you see cones on the ground, they've already given up their seed. You know, typically the seed falls out of the cones before the cone ever comes out of the tree. So we have to have people that climb those trees and collect the cones, and we bag and tag them and track them so that we make sure that we know where they came from, what elevation band, what seed zone. The state is divided into a bunch of different seed zones, and based on, you know, we want to use native material and native seed, in other words, that is collected from that area. We don't want to plant something in Southern California that we collected in the Klamath Mountains or something like that, just because it's better. You know, it's that genetic adaptation to the site that is important. We do most of those collections by contract also, although we determine what trees are climbed in conjunction with the climbers, because though we know what trees we want to collect from, we also want to do it safely. Obviously, we want the climbers to be able to do their work in a safe fashion. The issue with cone collection is that there isn't always a good cone crop in any particular species each year. This year, 2022, has not been a good cone year. We are doing very little, well, relatively speaking, compared for what we do. We're doing little cone collection because there simply is not a good cone crop throughout pretty much most of the state. Where there's a few areas in the southern part of the state, and then up on the by the Oregon border that we are doing collections this year, but most other areas there just isn't much of a crop.
Well, let's stick to that theme, I guess. Excessive heat, drought, broken sprinkler valves, busted irrigation lines, insect disease. These are struggles I face in my backyard garden. But what are some of the struggles that you and the nursery staff face?
The struggles we have is, first off, going back to the seed supply, there are some areas where we're short on seed, and we're trying to get caught up through seed collections. But even when we have the seed, which we do for most lots that we need to grow, even when we have plenty, we have to go through pulling and weighing the seed and stratifying it. And stratifying means we have to chill it for a period of time, and that varies by species and even by individual seed lot. But it typically is usually about 9. If you pick the average number, it's around 9 weeks time. So we need to try to time it so that even though it's okay for seed to stratify for a longer period than what is what we have listed in our data, if we leave it in there too long and we don't turn and re-dry down the seed that's in there, it can mold. If we, like for instance, this year we did have some delays in getting our sowing done, so it took a lot more work to make sure that we kept the seed from molding before we could sow it. And then after sowing, we actually have, as part of our contract, we have somebody that does what we call birding, which is in the mornings for basically sunrise and 4 hours after and about 4 hours before sunset is where we typically have the most activity from birds and rodents like squirrels. That they're smart. They know that we are growing these seedlings and we're sowing all this seed, and of course that's what they like to eat. So we have to make sure that we keep the squirrels and the birds at bay so they don't eat too much of the seed. And then once the seed is up and growing, there's of course always issues with controlling the competing vegetation. There's weed seeds that blow in, and for the most part, especially with the container seedlings, those have to be hand weeded. So there's a lot of upkeep that has to go on with those seedlings. The other thing is that we use different fertilizer mixes with the seedlings during different intervals within their growth period. And those fertilizer mixes, we can't just lay them down like you would put fertilizer on your lawn. That has to be mixed and then mixed in with the irrigation water when we're irrigating the plants. We also have issues, although thankfully it's not too frequently, with insect and disease issues. We've had problems with everything from mites to there's a little bug called ligus that will eat on the vascular tissue of the needles on the seedlings. So we have to monitor for those types of things. And then when we do have pest issues such as that, is we try first off to deal with those pest issues in a non-chemical way. For instance, we've used ladybug releases, those types of things. It would be nice if the ladybugs would stick around, but unfortunately they don't. they eat up the insects that we're trying to get rid of, and probably some others as well. And then they fly off somewhere else where there's more food for them. But so there's constant monitoring of and dealing with insect and disease issues. And then when we're packing seedlings, the biggest problem there typically is weather, because, for instance, in the fields, we cannot get out there and lift the seedlings until we get dry enough conditions in the field that we can operate tractors out there without getting them stuck or without tearing up the fields. And at the same time, we don't want it to be too dry. Another issue with when we're lifting is heat. Sometimes we'll get these really warm spells even in the winter time, where it stresses the trees to the point where we can't lift them. We're just creating too much of a potential issue with the trees being packed in a condition that is not conducive or greatest chance for survival when they're outplanted. So we have to monitor the moisture stress levels in those seedlings. And we do that with both the bare root as well as the container seedlings, but it's the bigger issue on the bare root seedlings. And then, of course, when we are packing the seedlings, some of these seedlings will have to be stored in boxes or bags if they're bare root for several months. And so we have to be able to pack them so that the tops of the trees are as dry as possible. And in the case of container seedlings, pretty much completely dry, but we don't want the roots dry, obviously. So it's kind of a delicate balance to get them in the right moisture and dryness between top and bottom when they're packed, so that they will last the longest in the coolers. Those are the main, I would say, obstacles that we are dealing with, as well as now some issues with our capacity, as we ramp up, and that's why we're expanding the nursery, as well as working with private nurseries to meet the needs of the increased pace in reforestation on the national forests.
I almost feel like I need to pause because you're going to add another one. So is that it, Gary? Because based on all those factors to consider, I will not complain the next time I accidentally plant a petunia in a shady spot and it dies. Wow. Okay, let's shift back to the positive side of the spectrum. So proud moments, milestones, any latest agricultural technology or discovery that you'd consider a game changer?
The job I'm doing now, as well as what I did before I came here 7 years ago, I like to think, and I think we are making a difference in reestablishing forests on these burned areas on the national forests. And I'm very proud of what we've done. I'm very proud of what we continue to do. And I know that we have a big job ahead of us under the direction of the Replant Act to greatly increase the amount of the pace of reforestation. And I have great confidence in the people that are out there on the ground doing the work. I try to make myself available as much as possible to those people, in particular the newer folks, to share my knowledge and experiences of what not only what we do at the nursery, but with what I learned over years and years of doing reforestation projects out on the ground. I think in the way of improved technology that helps us do our job, I think that probably more of that is done on the nursery side than on the outplanting side, just because so much of what we do when we're putting trees in the ground out on the forests is utilizing what we can do in the way of improving the chances of survival. Is a lot of that has to do with just learning more and more that allows us to make better decisions on on how we handle and treat those seedlings. There's been a lot of good science that has come out of the research branch over the years that has definitely helped us, and that's on both the field side and the nursery side. Another thing that has helped over the years also is improvements in geographical information systems, or people may have heard of it as GIS, and the abilities of us to use GIS to better and use information and analyze things on large scales. And then along with that, there's been tremendous improvements in fire severity mapping, that type of thing that helps us hone in on the areas that really have been impacted the most in the case of a fire. So we can, some of these fires are just absolutely astronomical in size, and they're to be able to go out there and find the areas that are the most heavily impacted and need our attention the first, maybe over some of the other areas. Those GIS systems and the fire severity mapping and so forth is incredibly helpful in helping us target our attention, I guess you could say.
So for the listeners who drive past areas damaged by wildfires and maybe see, like what I saw, a sea of colored marking flags or new growth, what does a successful reforestation look like?
We have, when it comes to areas that we are reforesting, we have standards, what are called stalking standards that at a minimum even we need to meet. And when you look at all the obstacles that not just the Forest Service personnel doing the work, but the trees themselves have up against them, it's rewarding to see when you have areas established and meeting those standards, and also that show the diversity, at least in tree species, that should be on the site. One of the strange things with this job is that you really won't see the end result of these areas that we're reforesting, as in them becoming forests that have some of the say wildlife habitat characteristics that were present in those forests before they burned, simply because it takes so long for those areas to come back. Even with us going out and planting those areas, if we weren't planting and we let nature take its course, it would be far longer even than what the idea of planting and reforesting areas is to speed up the process of these areas returning to what they once were, the forests that they once were. But unfortunately, we don't live long enough to see the fruits of our labors.
Gary, 22 million acres of national forest land in the Pacific Southwest region here in California, 1.2 billion trees planted. Year after year, we are struck with wildfire, drought, and insect damage. The Forest Service has always welcomed partners in getting projects done. This can't be any different.
I think that the public would be surprised to know just how much collaboration goes on in carrying out these projects. We don't do it alone in the Forest Service. We're constantly collaborating with state agencies, local agencies. The tribes play a big role in working with us on these projects. And there's a number of nonprofit organizations like the American Forest Foundation, One Tree Planted, the National Forest Foundation, the Arbor Day Foundation, that all of these groups, working together, make this happen. It's very much a collaborative effort, and I should include too the private nurseries, the private companies that do the contract work with us. it's very much a group effort to make this happen.
Gary, thank you so much for being on the show, and to the staff at the Placerville Nursery in Camino. We truly appreciate all your work and efforts. And with the expansion in the near future, if you could just share some final thoughts, we'd truly appreciate that. And again, thank you so much.
I really love the work I do and did before I got here. I feel like we're making a difference, and to me that makes a big difference to me when I get up in the morning and go to work. That there's a purpose behind what I do. I believe in what I do, and if you're into, there's the nurturing and growing these seedlings and seeing what happens when they're out planted on the site, and watching these sites come back, watching these trees grow. It's just been very, very interesting and very rewarding to me. I don't think if I had it all to do over, I don't think I'd change a thing. I think I ended up in the right field. All right. Well, thank you, Paul.
Well, we hoped you learned something about one of our hidden gems, the Placerville Nursery. I learned I clearly do not have a green thumb, because planting is scientific. The knowledge of the plant, the soil, the environment, it requires more than simply sticking roots into the ground. For more on the nursery's history, the other facilities, and seed extractories across the nation, make sure to click the helpful links on the show's landing page on our website. Thank you for listening. To learn more about the show, share it, or hear our other episodes, please search Forest Focus Podcast. And if you have questions or suggestions on a topic of area of expertise you would like us to feature, please email us at sm.fs.r5ffpodcast@usda.gov. Until next time, enjoy your public lands. And remember to recreate responsibly. Know before you go, and learn what you can do to prevent wildfires. Take care. This podcast is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Forest Service, and the USDA is an equal opportunity provider, employer, and lender.